In the heart of a small, forgotten town nestled between endless miles of thick forest, there stood a decrepit mansion, once the grand estate of a wealthy family, now rotting in silence. The townsfolk never ventured near it, even in daylight. They whispered about a curse, about people who had entered and were never seen again. The mansion was known by one name, the Collector's House. Diane didn't believe in curses. A history student with a passion for the macabre, she had spent months researching the mansion and its twisted past. The original owner, Edgar Beaumont, had been a surgeon with a fascination for bone preservation. Rumors claimed he collected more than just artifacts. Local legends spoke of people disappearing, their bodies found stripped of flesh, their bones carefully cleaned and arranged in Beaumont's study. But those were just stories, Diane thought. Superstitions passed down to scare children. One stormy night, Diane decided to visit the mansion. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, she was eager to document the truth and disprove the town's ghost stories. The air was thick with fog as she approached the crumbling estate, its once ornate gates hanging ajar like the gaping mouth of a corpse. The towering house loomed over her, its windows dark and hollow, as if the very soul of the building had been drained. Stepping inside, the air felt thick and oppressive. The floorboards creaked under her feet, and the smell of decay was overpowering. The walls were lined with old medical equipment, surgical tools rusted with age, and strange, unsettling diagrams of the human skeleton. It was as if the house itself were a mausoleum, a shrine to the dead. Diane's flashlight flickered, casting long, erratic shadows across the dusty hallways. She moved deeper into the mansion, her pulse quickening as she noticed something strange. Bones. Tiny bones, human bones, arranged meticulously on old tables displayed like trophies. Her stomach churned, but she pressed on, determined to find the truth behind the legend. As she made her way to the second floor, she heard it. A faint scraping sound, the kind of sound you'd expect if something sharp was dragging across stone. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The noise was distant, but it was there, moving closer, echoing through the empty mansion. Diane swallowed her fear and continued, each step feeling heavier than the last. The corridor led to a large study, its walls lined with glass cases filled with bones. Skulls, spines, rib cages, each one cleaned and arranged with surgical precision. In the center of the room stood an enormous wooden table, and on it, the skeleton of a young woman lay, her bones polished and gleaming in the faint light. But something was wrong. The bones were not old, they were fresh. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. These were not relics of some long-past crime. The collector was still here, still adding to his grotesque collection. The scraping sound returned, louder this time, closer. Diane turned toward the door, her flashlight flickering again, casting frantic beams of light across the room. For a brief moment in the shifting shadows, she saw it. A figure. Tall, gaunt, draped in ragged, blood-stained clothes. Its face was obscured by a mask made of bone, human bone, stitched together with leather straps. In its hand, it held a long, rusted bone saw, scraping it against the floor as it walked. The bone collector. Diane backed away, her heart racing, but the figure didn't move quickly. It didn't need to. The house was his domain, his sanctuary. She was nothing more than the next piece for his collection. The door behind her slammed shut with a violent thud, trapping her inside the study. Desperation set in as she looked for a way out, her hands trembling. She could hear the collector's slow, deliberate footsteps growing closer. The sound of the bone saw scraping along the floor made her blood run cold. She sprinted to the windows, but they were sealed tight, covered with thick boards that hadn't been touched in years. The collector was behind her now, his breath slow and ragged, a wheezing sound that filled the room with dread. Diane could feel his eyes on her, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, the lights in the house flickered and went out. The darkness was absolute. Her flashlight, her last hope, sputtered and died, plunging her into pitch black. She could hear him moving, slowly circling her, the scraping of the bone saw inching closer. Diane stumbled, her foot hitting something hard. She reached out and her fingers brushed against a brittle, cold object, a human skull. Her scream caught in her throat as she realized she was standing amidst the collector's trophies, his victims, their bones carefully arranged in grotesque displays. And then, he was there. Close enough that she could hear his labored breathing, feel the cold air as it rushed past her. The sound of the bone saw being dragged across the floor stopped. Silence, the kind that suffocates. Diane didn't dare move. Her body was paralyzed with fear. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her, the presence of the collector hovering just out of sight. Suddenly, something cold and hard brushed against her cheek. Her breath hitched as she realized what it was. The bone saw. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the faint rhythmic sound of bones being sawed methodically with the precision of a surgeon. Diane was never seen again, but the townspeople spoke of strange lights in the mansion at night, and if you listened closely, they said, you could hear the faint sound of bones scraping across stone. The collector had added another piece to his eternal collection, and the house was still waiting.